Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the MMT Tech Meet-up 2020 for November. And this time around, we're going to be talking about web accessibility. And in particular, obviously, this is a really important topic for everyone out there as well. And this becomes like our last MMT Tech Meetup of the year. But thank you for all joining. And let's get started. So obviously, I run MMT Tech Meet-up. My name's Ilesh Mistry. I'm a CMS specialist and a content MVP. You can get my contact details here. And a quick thing about sort of like the company that I work for, which is MMT Digital. One of the big things that we do is obviously making sure that we can help our clients build digital products that transform their business performance. And if you need to contact them, there's a QR code for them as well. A little bit of a plug, which is really to kind of say that we are looking and we are recruiting. So if you're interested, there's some roles there, and there's many more roles as well. You can just check out the website. But back to the meetup side of things. So the MMT Tech meetups are more front-end driven topics. And if you have any ideas of future ones or want to be involved, or just even have like recommended speakers as well, just get in touch with me, and then we can kind of sort something out. Yeah, that's the MMT Tech meetups. So before we get started, just a quick few things is really to just make sure you just drop your questions in the chat, and most likely you'll get a session at the end of each presentation to kind of ask questions as well. We'll be recording these sessions as well, so we can, if you have to leave at any point, then that's not a problem, and we'll share it later on once we can actually export the video out. And if you can, it would be really good if you can share anything that you've noticed here or want to promote, really using the hashtag and any handles that you'll see in the presentations. Okay. So today's agenda is going to be, accessibility driven. So we've got Graham. He's going to be talking about why be accessible. Then I'll basically be talking about some common accessibility mistakes that have been made and assumptions that people have made. And then Tomas is going to talk about how to use Pail CI to prevent accessibility issues. And then we've got Nadia at the end using persona profiles for accessible websites. So we've got a really good sort of like lineup. So I'm going to hand over to Graham now. So Graham.
I'm Graham Rees-Evans. So I'm the technical manager of the Shore Trust Accessibility Services. So the Shore Trust is a national charity that helps disabled and disadvantaged people get back into the workplace, live more independent lives, and just generally be a part of society like everyone else can. The accessibility services side of it then, so we have a team of individuals that have a range of disabilities, and we utilize their experiences and their personal challenges to be able to help and support our accessibility supporting organizations to become more accessible. So yeah, we're not just a couple of techies that kind of know a little bit about accessibility. We actually utilize the knowledge and experience of these individuals that have got or that are living with these experiences to support organizations to become accessible. So we're a little bit of a social enterprise, and we started off training individuals who were blind or had physical impairments to use particular assistive technology. And we realized very quickly that that websites, mobile apps, documents and things like that just weren't compatible anyway. So what was the real point in these individuals being super duper users if actually the websites and the material out there wasn't going to be any good for them anyway? We work within the digital and the physical environment, so we will audit offices and businesses and physical spaces as well, but the majority of our work is in the digital sphere. We're based in Neath in South Wales, but we're really not fussy who we work with. You know, web material has the beauty of being universally accessible and universally available, so we don't really mind where we kind of work with. So we perform assessments, we deliver training, we help convert media documents over to accessible formats, but our main kind of outputs are assessing material. So we've worked with a number of different people. You know, as I said, we're not really fussy who we work with. We've got a lot of local authorities and things coming to us at the moment because of the new public sector accessibility regulations. So our client base is kind of twisted or fallen over into public sector organizations at the moment. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we don't work with blue chip organizations, large private businesses as well, anyone that's really looking to make their content more accessible and grow their audience base, really. And I think I'd just like to really start off my my bits and pieces by looking at a quote from Tim Berners-Lee. So the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So even way back in sort of you know, this kind of late 90s, we were still or we were noticing the benefit that the web could have for individuals that have disabilities and impairments. So this isn't really a new topic around. You know, this has been around for a number of years now, and I still don't think we're quite there with our accessibility of our web content, really. And so what is accessibility then, just to make sure that we're all on kind of the same page. And our definition for what accessibility is equal access to information services regardless of a physical or developmental ability. And we try and focus on the ability of individuals all the time, you know, try and put a positive spin on things. And so we're looking at the ability of that individual. And this doesn't necessarily have to be physical ability. It could be technological ability. It could be just confidence in using technology as well. So we're making our content equally accessible to those individuals that, yes, have physical or sensory impairments, but we're also looking at the lack of confidence in people as well. So it's not just disability that accessibility affects. And then our kind of second definition then, I guess, is the ability to read and understand material. And it's that key second phrase there, which is understanding our content. So it's not just good enough to make your content easy to navigate, easy to find. We actually need to reduce the complexity of our information at the end of that journey as well. So we need to find, we need to read, we need to understand material, and again, regardless of that individual's ability. And just one recurring theme that I'd like you to think about as I'm talking is your website is for everyone. So it's not just for people that are tech savvy. It's not just for your non-disabled audience. It is for absolutely everyone to be able to access and interact with that content. So what does our actual audience look like then? Why should I bother thinking about accessibility? And why should I even think that I've got any clients that have got disabilities or impairments? Well, 1 in 5 people living in the UK have a disability. So at the time of these statistics, they're probably a little bit higher now, but at the time that was around 12 million people. So that's a massive chunk of the population has some sort of disability or impairment. 15% of adults have an impairment, so that's around 9.5 million people. And 17% of adults are born with their impairment. So that's a tiny chunk in comparison to the whole population that have got their disabilities. So I think we wrongly think that everyone that's got a disability has had it for years and years and years, and they're well accustomed to that disability. But that's not necessarily the case. You might have had an accident last week, last month, last year, that you've suddenly acquired this new way of living, this new disability. So not everyone is born with their disabilities. 1 in 7 are deaf or have a hearing impairment, 1 in 30 are blind or have a visual impairment, and 2% have a learning disability. So again, quite large numbers. 8% of the population have English as an additional language, and the top 5 languages in the UK are English, Welsh, Polish, Punjabi, and Urdu. So if you're only producing your content in English, you might be missing out on a significant chunk of your audience again. 9 is the average reading age of adults in the UK. So coincidentally, the same reading age as the Sun newspaper. Read into that what you will. 15% of our adults have dyslexia, so some struggle with reading. 16% are functionally illiterate and would not pass a GCSE in English, and 1% are completely illiterate. So 1% are going to have problems with, just think of what you've done today which needs you to read. So if you commuted to work this morning and you got on public transport, you had to read a timetable. 1% of our adults can't do that. You might have gone in for some lunch and ordered from a menu. 1% of adults can't do that. You might have read the newspaper or checked some social media. Again, we've got a percentage of our audience can't do that. So lots and lots and lots of little statistics there, just to give you an idea of what our audience makeup looks like. And it's not just your typical white male, fully able-bodied individual that is going to be accessing your content. There's going to be lots and lots of different types of individuals that need you to make those accessibility adaptations. So again, your website is for absolutely everyone. It's for everyone that I talked about in that list and more. So that, you know, it's for absolutely everyone. So why? What are the sticks, I suppose, to beat us with? Why should we be accessible? If your website is inaccessible, you could potentially be breaking the Equality Act of 2010, which says I cannot be treated less favorably because of my disability. Now, it's not written in there black and white that it covers websites, but if you're offering a better, faster, cheaper service on your website than I can get either face-to-face or over the phone, and I cannot use your website, then you're breaking the Equality Act. The European Accessibility Act of 2018, or that really, really long official name underneath, is the new piece of legislation that the UK has adopted from EU law, and basically says that all public sector bodies needed to be accessible by September 2020, so literally just gone. You need to publish an accessibility statement, and you need to be working on making your content fully accessible. And then the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We're currently on 2.1, but soon to be 2.2, and 3 is in the is being created as we speak. And these are a set of internationally recognized guidelines that we should be following to make our content accessible. They're in 3 levels: level A, level AA, level AAA, and AA is really where we should be aiming for. Single A is really your minimum standards. AA is where we should be aiming for, and AAA is the nice to have, the cherry on the cake. What are the benefits then? So improved SEO, improved search engine results. If you've got more accessible content, it's going to be more accessible to search engines as well as real people. Mobile users, so it's going to better wrap and respond to smaller screen sizes and even larger screen sizes. So more accessible your content is, the more translatable it's going to be for mobile devices as well. Audience reach, you're going to reach more people. If you're making your content suddenly accessible to all the blind people in the country or all the individuals that have got a physical impairment in the country, then of course your audience reach is going to grow. Translation, so again, or internationalization, if you want a slightly longer word. If you make your content more accessible, it's more usable and more reachable by translation services as well. So we're able to provide that content then in new languages as well. User experience, there's a strong correlation between improving the accessibility of a product and the general usability of that product as well. Maintenance, duplication. So years ago, we used to have the The done thing was to have your able-bodied or your normal website over here, and then a special website over here for your blind users, and then perhaps another one for your colorblind users, and then another one for your deaf users, potentially. So you're duplicating that content all over the place. So if you would need to make a change, you've got to make that change in multiple different places. Whereas if you make one set of content fully accessible, then that's still one piece of content that you've got to change if you need to. Social responsibility, you demonstrate that you understand that your audience is diverse and that they do come from different backgrounds and they do have different abilities. So you are trying to reach as many of these individuals as possible, and you understand that there are differences out there with your audience. Legal liability, so even doing the tiniest little thing to help your audience or prove that you're looking into accessibility is going to help support you if you ever get taken to court or sued or anything. You know, you're going to reduce your chance of any legal proceedings if you can prove, look, this is what I've done, these are the adaptions I've taken, I just must have missed that particular one little thing. Wider access to information, your end users get wider access. Whenever I buy a holiday, I don't just go to one website, I go to 3 or 4, maybe even more, to try and find the cheapest deal, the best deal, the deal with the most benefits. If there's only one website that's accessible to me for that particular type of information, then I haven't got a choice. I've got to go to that website. So having more and more websites become accessible, I get more and more choice. And independence and self-sufficiency. So individuals with disabilities and impairments are told on a daily basis, you can't do this because you're blind, you can't do that because you're in a wheelchair, you can't do that because you've only got one arm. So if we can turn around to individuals and say, do you know what? Yeah, you can buy that product, or yes, you can apply for that service, or yes, you can get in touch with me that way, then value of independence and self-sufficiency goes through the roof. And just as a side note, families that have got at least one disabled family member have got a spending power of £200 billion. So if you can get a little slice of that cake before the next company, then you're winning. So what accessibility means then? So these are a couple of quotes that we've had from various different individuals. So we've got a communications officer that had an assessment with us and now understands a little bit more about what they need to do to make their content accessible. It was such a big, daunting challenge that they had in the beginning that they just didn't know where to start. But once you tell them, well, actually, it's only a little tweak here and a little tweak there, then it becomes so much easier to handle. Josie, who is our screen reader user, you know, she has the ability now to make informed choices because she's got a large pool of resources, a large pool of information to make all those decisions from. And then Zara, who's a contact we've got at a web development agency, and they have turned their tables on how they make content accessible, and they are striving to make all of their websites that they build for their clients fully accessible. So accessibility means a lot to different people. But what does it look like in real life? Why have we got these challenges? Why do we still need to exist? Why am I running an organization, or why am I running a business that needs to be there to help other organizations? Surely people should just know what it takes to make accessible content. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. I mean, we have laws around building accessibility, for example. There's no way that you could build a new office block or a new hotel these days without ramps, lifts, wider doorways, higher plug sockets, lower light switches. There's no way that you could do that because it's ingrained in law. But making accessible digital content is still a little bit of a dark art. And I've got a couple of examples to show you what I mean. So money matters. We've been working with a low-cost airline recently, and their website states that they have 450,000 customers a year that have some form of disability or impairment. We've averaged that out, so that's about £90 a flight. So that's potentially an awful lot of money that if they hadn't made these accessibility changes, that they would be losing. Massive, massive chunk. So some examples then. So link labeling. Labeling your links needs to be really, really descriptive. So showing a load of ad links is not the way to go. It's not accessible, it's not usable, it's not easy for us to understand what's going on. Access methods. So this is a local stationery suppliers, I guess. This is their old website, but the example still stands. They've got a menu system that is fully mouse dependent. The only thing that can use this menu system is a mouse. If I'm a keyboard user, a screen reader user, a voice activation user, I'm not going to have access to that content. Some more barriers then. So creating custom content. This, again, this particular shop has these 3 radio buttons at the end of their checkout, which are completely inaccessible. Again, I've wasted my hour, my 2 hours, trying to add things to my basket, and I can't get past this particular feature. Because when they've built these radio buttons, they haven't built accessibility into that either. More barriers, captures at the end of a process. So again, I spend another hour completing a form, and I get to a capture, and it provides me with an inaccessible option. The Google reCAPTCHA is probably the closest I'm going to get to something usable, something beneficial, but still can cause some barriers for individuals. Color contrast is another example. If you don't get your color contrast right, or your contrast between your foreground and your background, you're not going to be providing useful and accessible content for users that makes it easy to read. And there's no reason why you shouldn't. There's 140 trillion different colors, and even if we have 1% that are accessible, that still leaves us with 141 million colors. So if you can't find a color that matches, I think you've got the issue rather than the accessibility side. So what does a person do when they find an inaccessible website? Well, they don't bother complaining. They don't bother moaning to anyone. They don't bother taking legal action. They just go somewhere else. They take their business and they disappear to a different website and spend their money and apply for their services and do that elsewhere. If they can't do that, if it's a local government service, if it's applying for my council tax, or it's contacting my local councillor, I have no choice. I've got to beg somebody and ask for help somewhere else, losing my independence, losing my self-sufficiency, and really not feeling like I matter to that organization. So what can you do? What can developers do? What can content creators do? What can we do to make our online information better and more accessible? Design with accessibility in mind. Design at every stage of the process. You need to add accessibility in, even when it's a concept, even when it's a scrappy squiggle, a draft on the back of a beer mat, or on a blank piece of paper. If it's just a wireframe, whatever stage, you need to be adding in accessibility, at least a thought into that process. And even when it's built, it then needs to be reviewed periodically to make sure that no new content hasn't crept in and damaged the accessibility of that content. Every step of the journey, concept, design, wireframing, template, your whole build, and then after the build as well. You need to be thinking about accessibility all the time. Build with accessibility in mind. So make your content perceivable, operable, usable, and robust. So these are the 4 principles that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are built on. So make your content easy to use, actually usable, and then robust, so the ability to move between browsers and devices and not break or fall over. So we need to be thinking of all of these different elements when we start making our content. So are our headings marked up correctly? Are our links descriptive and clickable and keyboard usable? Are our images available to our blind and our screen reader users? Is everything keyboard accessible? Are our colors accessible? Is everything labeled? Are all our form fields labeled correctly? Do we help our users complete processes by giving them instructions and giving them help to fill in text boxes or questions correctly? What about our media? What about our audio files? What about our video files? What about our animations? What about anything like that? And then what about the readability of our content as well? Am I targeting my writing to the right age range, the right target audience? Am I actually writing that content so that people can understand it, or so that I sound like I'm well educated and I know what I'm talking about? Because the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. So again, your website is for absolutely everyone. Not just the people that have got the skills to access it, not just the people that have got the vision to access it, or the hearing to access it, or anyone that's in a particular special field. Your website is for everyone. So if you only take away a couple of things from my little couple of minutes, just remember equal access to information regardless of abilities or impairments. 1 in 5 people have a disability. We need to be thinking about the Equality Act and the European Accessibility Act, and we are potentially missing out on a massive, massive chunk of revenue from those individuals. Cool. Thank you very much. That's me done.
Thanks, Graham. Just have a few seconds. If anyone's got any questions, pop them on the chat or can ask away.
Yeah, I've got a question. So all of that stuff was really good, really helpful. What advice, obviously you've got the key bullet points at the end, but if you were looking at sort of resources to help you with getting your head around all of that, because it's a lot to kind of take on as a dev, what would be your advice in that regard?
I think, yeah, reading the web content accessibility guidelines is probably not gonna. It's gonna give you some idea, but it's not gonna help you because they're not written in plain English essentially. There are quite a few accessibility checklists out there, so look for WCAG checklists, or just going back on the kind of the boxy slide that I had. Those are probably the places to start. Things like keyboard accessibility is a massively easy place to start. All of us have got a keyboard. So just try interacting with your content with a keyboard. Then go down the route of colors, checking that all your colors pass. If you Google color contrast analyzer, you'll find an analyzer there to actually check your colors. You know, things like heading structure, your link labeling. It's those sort of 9 things that I'd probably start with. But yeah, certainly keyboard access is one of the main ones. If it's accessible to keyboard users, it'll generally be accessible to voice command users, and it'll be accessible to screen reader users as well.
Cool, thanks.
Great. Do we have any other questions? So that's great. Thanks, Graham. Great presentation. So next up is myself talking about common accessibility mistakes. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. So yeah, this is my presentation about common accessibility mistakes. You obviously know who I am. I'm Ilesh Mistry, and to contact me, you can contact me via there. The idea is that I'm going to be talking about, quite similar to some of the stuff that Graham's already covered, but it's more on the basis of some assumptions that people can make, that can be made by developers, designers. We're talking about the whole sort of team when it comes to like you know, creating a website from the start to all the way to the end. So that includes clients as well. So there'll be lots of sort of like face palms and head scratching and lots of those kind of moments. So I'll start off with the first one. So lots of people think that accessible websites are boring, ugly, whatever you want to call it, really. And that's the thing that, is probably a bad mentality to kind of, take when it comes to accessibility. It's the idea is that, you should really be thinking about, how you can make a website as best practice. So the idea is that accessible websites shouldn't be an extra effort. Like there probably is a little bit of effort, but it's not like massive. And once you get down to kind of like the accessibility considerations, then there's no reason why you can't create, really good looking websites. And there's a couple there that are in the screenshot as well. So it's a bad sort of like assumption to make. The other thing is like it probably goes along with the sort of accessible sort of way of thinking, but people might think, oh well, they have no time at the moment. So there's probably been lots of projects that people have been on where they leave the accessibility right to the end, or if they've got more budget, then they'll decide to kind of think of incorporating accessibility. And it goes back to what Graham's saying as well, like accessibility should be up for all. And if you don't make things accessible, then you risk losing people coming to your website, risk losing some clients and potential revenue. So so basically leaving it at the end will cost probably more really to kind of incorporate in. So imagine you've built a really nice looking website and then you decide, oh, I need to make it accessible. And that's like a lot of work you probably kind of have to think about and think, okay, like now I need to crowbar accessibility when I could have done it at the start. Therefore, planning is like, it needs to be done really early on and it will save you a lot of time and money. And with lots of people have probably experienced that already. And with doing that as well is if, for example, you've got, plugins that you're using on websites, then you can at least look at accessible plugins rather than a plugin that's really popular or a plugin that you seem to feel it's going to be best fit. But actually, if you knew about accessibility at the start, then you can at least find one that's going to actually fit the bill. Another sort of like, a thing that we kind of sometimes, come across is people might think, well, accessibility development is just for front-end developers. And that sort of like gets me thinking and think, why would you even think that? Because like, the whole point is that we have a whole team. So whether that ranges from the client all the way to the back end and front end developers as testers as well. So you're looking at the whole sort of like team here. And that's kind of a bad thing to kind of think about as well. And you get comments where we don't need to pair on this as a, I'm just going to provide the data and you're the front end developer, you can just make it look pretty, but that's not how we should be looking at things. We should basically, thinking about accessibility for all. Any back end work that comes out, there's got to be some accessibility implications from it. So say, for example, someone is looking at a data that comes from, say, a JSON file, but in that data, if it doesn't have the accessible entities that we want to kind of show and express on the page, then the back-end developer needs to get some more work to bring it back again. So, it's kind of like a whole team effort. And I feel it's kind of dangerous to be left separate with no communication. So communication is like a big thing in whatever we kind of develop. Another thing that goes on is like you come across people who are accessible experts. So, hey, I'm like, I'm into web accessibility. I'm an expert. Trust me, I can do all the tools that be accessible. Don't need to like run any tools to kind of check. I've done cool stuff, work on all the browsers. Just trust me, that kind of like mentality. And it's like, I feel like don't trust that person because you don't know, like, they could be really good and that's really fair play to them. But checking accessibility is very important and it shouldn't be just left on like one person thinking that's all going to work. And cross-browser, you could get cross-browser issues. So you could fix or create like a thing that you've got in there that is accessible on one browser, but somehow breaks on another browser. So, having the testing there is going to be very important. And you know, having automated test tools will help with that. And you know, Thomas, who's going to present after me, is going to be talking about a particular testing tool as well. So that's going to be quite cool to watch out for. Another thing, obviously, is, you know, people might be thinking, well, they're a content editor on a CMS or something, and they can't add accessible elements. So, you know, you build a really sort of like, you know, you're accessible on the front end, and you've built everything, and, you know, it works fine. But actually, the content editors who manage that website can't add any accessible features in. So you've done everything you could, but actually you haven't exposed things that you should be exposing. So CMS websites don't, you know, the fact is that they can't, you know, sometimes allow you to do this. So what you need to do is probably expose it. And another thing you probably need to think about is, like, sometimes the CMS itself may chuck out things that you don't, are not accessible. So that's the thing where, you know, it's very important to try and speak to that vendor, because accessibility levels are very important to kind of abide to. And if a CMS is the one that kind of stops you getting to, say, AA, then that's very important that that CMS is either a wrong choice, or basically the CMS should find a way to help you bypass that AA standards. And, you know, there's other things out there to make sure that, you know, the fields that we create for people that are doing content entry are all possible and all accessible as well. Another thing is, obviously, Graham mentioned about images, and there's lots of things to kind of consider where, like, you know, you could get a scenario where people are saying the text on the images are great for banners and carousels, but actually, you know, why do I need alt text, and why do I need to do this kind of stuff? So, you know, people feel that that could be like a common mistake that people make, that, you know, not considering images, which is like one of the biggest things to really think about, is they need to understand it's not just an accessibility concern. You know, things like text on an image could be like a problem with responsive elements. And it's important to have alt text, which allows, you know, an alternative option to be seen. So alternative text to be seen for that particular image, if, for example, images can't be seen on there. So very, you know, important to kind of make sure your images have alt text, but then there's areas where you probably can't use alt text. So, for example, decorative images, they can probably get away with just an empty alt text, but very important to kind of distinguish between the two. But when you're defining alt text, it's also important not to just put text, you know, like imagine you, for that particular image there, you just said text on red background. That's useless. So that might as well be no alt text on the page. So things like that are very important to describe what is actually on that image. And obviously this is a bad example because it's like a banner, but if the image itself, it's very important to kind of describe what's on that image. So it's so someone who hasn't got a visual, they can basically understand what that image is. And obviously the screen readers would utilize the alt text as well. So Graham touched on this as well, which is to do with the color contrast. So I feel this is like a big thing that goes from the early stages. UX designers, you know, they do a fabulous job, and, you know, they look at the color contrasting and, you know, use either the things that Graham's mentioned, the tools online, or they've got some other ones that they've used. But, you know, sometimes you might find like a rollover or a hover effect actually isn't actually color contrasted. It doesn't work. And those are the things that are going to be hard for people who can still visually see it, but probably find it difficult to kind of read. So it's very important to kind of bear those things in mind as well. And you've got to remember that everyone sees things differently. So, you know, people may see, like, I think there's like a thing that happened a while ago where someone said there was like a dress that looked blue and then actually it was gold to some other people. And it's like, you know, the way that people actually see those colors is kind of important, and it's better to try and make it as color contrast as possible. And then the other one that people kind of have is the fact that they'll probably look at like font and text, and they say, oh yeah, I want to use this font, you know, I can use this particular cool font that I want on the website. But then they find as well that the designers have set a particular font up to be a particular size on a page. And the designer said, well, you can't really shift it or move it around or do anything with that text. And that's where you get to a point where you've got to be a little bit sort of careful, and you've got to do a little bit of pushback. So there's things where you need to kind of have communications at the start. You've got to think about legibility to make sure that your text is legible, but also make sure that there is communication to make sure that the font size could change, and maybe a placement of that text could change as well. So speaking to the designers is really important for that. But also you've got to think about as well is like the text size itself. Modern browsers allow you to do the zoom functionality, but you've got to make sure that if that is happening, that your layout doesn't break. If they do a resizing option, you've got to make sure that keeps everything in proportions as well. Headings. So headings are really important. So it's not just like accessibility, but you've got some examples there where you could find like a really nicely built UX and designed page, and there's no heading 1 on the homepage. You've got to kind of question that with the team and see where that could actually sit. And designers as well, maybe they may say, okay, well, you've got a heading 1, but a heading 2 size, if they gave you like sizes and predefined sort of options to use, just would it look good underneath the particular layout that they've supplied. And they're probably recommending to use heading 4. And one of the things that you've got to bear in mind is that hierarchy of the headings is very, very important for best practice and accessibility for screen readers as well. So, if we have to do H1 and then H4 after that, that's not going to work. So again, a collaborative approach to say, okay, well, can we just add like a heading 2 still underneath heading 1, add something like a class to kind of just make it look like a smaller heading. This is very important for assistive technologies to understand what the meaning of the page is and the structure of how you have your pages themselves. Other thing is to do with buttons and links. So, Graham mentioned sort of like the keyboard users. So, you could get someone from a website that's been built to say, my button, I can't click on it or can't tab onto it with the keyboard or a screen reader, and the link doesn't tell me anything. So similar to what Graham said, like where it had like read more or buy or click here. We've got to be careful when we do these kind of things. And, especially when it comes to like the buttons and the links, it's very more important to think about like semantics. Make sure you're following like use button markup for buttons and anchor tags for links. Making sure that you use the right things at the right points rather than using maybe a div tag, which makes it easier to style maybe. But, it's important to kind of stick to semantics, because if you do then go for a div tag, then it just makes it on the elves of like, can that be clickable? And then obviously in this case, it would have probably been that the tab would actually skip that area unless you kind of indicate that it needs to kind of be tabbed on there. Also as well is when you do like the read more elements or click here, it's important to put something more descriptive in there because that's going to help the screen reader. And it's similar to the example that Graham pointed out. If you just see add 10, 15 times, that's going to be annoying imagine you close your eyes and you actually, get that screen reader to read that out to you. Which product do I add? And you just want to be able to kind of know that. So it's very important to kind of add to those things. And also like if you've got something like a link that opens in a new tab or window, it's very important to kind of warn the users that's going to happen as well. The other aspect of some of the mistakes that you get as well is like focus states. So in this case, we've got a few sort of like quotes there. So why do I need to have focus states? And I can't focus on this element. So we've looked at the button one already. So on the right hand side, you'll see an element on the gov.uk site, which is highly accessible. And one of the things that they do is obviously have a very clear to understand where you are and where you've actually focused to via the keyboard. So if you imagine like, you don't have that, or you have just like a faint line, even the visually, the fact that you would probably actually find it hard to see where you're on the page as well. So the focus helps to show you where you're on the page and where the focus is on the keyboard. The buttons and links also need to, if they're semantically correct, they can help be able to be tabbed on. And also making sure your markup is actually in a logical order. So if you had blocks of sections all above each other and then your CSS is being arranged differently, then you've got to bear in mind that that's the flow of the HTML markup that would actually kind of be followed. So it's important to make sure your markup is actually laid out in the right and logical order. And the focus outlines are very important. So you've got to make sure they don't clash with the current colors that you have on the website, because if they do, then there's no point having a focus state because you can't really see what that is anyway. So, you could have someone that says, okay, well, let's have this spinning thing on this page. Let's reload that part of that page. It could be like really a fun website where you can do lots of things, but actually, transitions can be hard for people to see if they're, there could be users that have to really be close to the screen to actually read and actually view a website. So if, for example, they're doing that and there's transitioning happening just a little bit away from that screen after they've zoomed in, they're not going to be able to see that. And that's going to be a big sort of like element where they're basically missing out and you haven't kind of catered for them as well. And it's important as well to make sure that you don't have too many things going on. So if you've got like a carousel at the top and then you've got another spinning thing at the bottom, and then there's multiple things on the page, then that's like causing lots of confusion as well. So try and keep that to a minimum. And important as well to think about ARIA. So ARIA allows you to kind of like do notifications or actually indicate that something's changed, and then letting the screen reader know and the user that something has changed, to look out for that as well. So talking about carousels, people, like I mentioned here, like people may want multiple carousels on the page, and but there used to be a point where literally like we could speak to people and they just were in love with carousels, and they just wanted carousels on pretty much every page, and potentially even multiple carousels on a page, which we were trying to sort of like advise them against, but sometimes it's harder to do that. And carousels in general are probably like harder to make accessible. If you imagine like you're going to a carousel and then actually, how do you stop on a keyboard to say, okay, I want to go to the second slide, but then not, and then read it and then move on to the next slide. There's a lot of problems with carousels in doing that. And that's why it's very important, to the point that we raised right early on, which is at the start, it's very important to know that you're considering accessibility. And if you are, then you can choose the right plugins to use for this accessibility side of things. So you can then find a play pause option. There's a way to actually allow for keyboard access. If you chose a carousel plugin that hadn't actually catered for that or built a custom one, then you would have found it quite tricky to kind of incorporate accessibility in at the end. Or probably have to rebuild it with an accessible plugin. So it's very important to kind of think about how the slides would actually work and go around with it. So I've got one example on the next slide. I hope the video audio will come through. So please let me know if it doesn't. If I can play. Oops, let's go back. So I'm just going to pause that right now. Just want to confirm, can people hear that?
Not sure, to be honest.
Not too sure. Can you hear that?
No.
Can you hear that?
Not clearly.
Okay,
No,
so it's very quiet. Let me see if I can increase my audio. Sorry, if it does anything. Let's see if this works. But basically, I can talk through this, but let me know if you can hear it. Can you hear that?
No.
No? Okay, so...
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll probably explain this a bit more. So, for example, this is actually a talk by Marcy Sutton. I basically heard her talk at Gatsby Days last year. And she basically talked about accessibility, and in particular carousels. There's a link on there, so hopefully, like when we can share the video later, we can kind of catch it up with it. But the idea is that I don't know if you can see on the screen, but basically you can see that it says a large black bear is inspecting a dumpster. So basically, they've picked a carousel from somewhere, and the text within the carousel, or the text that's further down, is actually being sort of read out again and again and again every time you click on the slide. So if you imagine a screen reader, or basically a screen reader trying to read this out to you, the idea is that you can see this bit of text, which is probably a little bit harder to read, but actually it's reading out a dumpster overflowing with garbage. But you can see that again underneath there. So literally, it's almost, I think it's every slide is basically reading all the slides again. So if you imagine something like that on a carousel, if it's not been built properly and a screen reader comes out, that's going to be like mega annoying. So, once you get, that sorted and make sure that you actually factor those things in mind, it's very important. But, hopefully like after the presentation's being shared, you can have a look at that video, but it's very, very funny. So the other thing is to think about navigation. So we had, navigation is obviously complicated when it comes to like tiering. And we've had like in the past where we've built a site for someone, and then, accessibility wasn't one of their priorities. And we're talking about a site that's built a good like couple of years ago or even longer. And accessibility wasn't one of their like big things at that start. And then they had like this sort of like 3 to 4 tier navigation. It was quite sort of like decent, like it wasn't too complicated, but you could see the complications on there. As soon as they mentioned, can you make that tabbable or accessible? That's when it came to prove a right nightmare, because it was custom built navigation, so it wasn't using the plugin. And it also meant the fact that the CSS and JavaScript, there's so many overriding to do to kind of get everything working. So, I feel like, and especially like we had another project, and I was, we were looking at the navigation, and we actually changed the navigation. We spoke to the design team, and we actually changed that so that we said, okay, like if we do keep the navigation tiers quite low, and make the navigation easier to kind of use via keyboard and accessible, then that meant obviously that navigation was actually, we could actually pass accessibility on that side. So we learned a lot from sort of like navigational structures. And it's very important to kind of consider the different levels you might have to consider, and all the different items that go on those navigations as well, because it might just not just be links, it might be an image, it might be sort of like a summary panel as well. And how are people going to read that, or how are people going to access that via the keyboard or screen readers, etc. It's also important to make sure that obviously, if decisions for navigations haven't been made early on, then there could be very sort of like implications with the CSS and JavaScript to kind of get it working again. And then forms. So forms, you're going to get lots of forms probably on websites, and there are different types of forms on the website. So you might get like the normal contact us form and forms like that, or you might get search panels, sign up details, etc. And Graham touched on this as well, is the fact that it's very important that a form itself, for it to pass accessibility, it needs to have a field set around it, which is almost like a grouping of fields together to know that it's part of a form. And also with that, a legend goes with each field set. So if you have a complicated form that's got lots of fields on the page, and they need to be grouped separately, then you may have multiple field sets and legends in there. So it's very important to kind of consider that, because I think when people create forms, it's sometimes the case of just create a form tag and put some labels in there and inputs, and I'm done. But actually for accessibility, it's very important to kind of consider those things. And important as well is when you create a label for a field, is to make sure that label is being associated to that field. So when you actually click on the label, it directs you straight into the text box and starts the cursor in there. So it's basically making sure that that is together and it's combining them together, and that's going to help accessibility as well. Graham touched on this as well, is to do with like reCAPTCHA and CAPTCHA. You know, like lots of people say, well, I'm getting lots of like spamming coming through on my forms, and is there a way to stop that? And naturally, there are ways, but it's to make sure that they are accessible ways. You don't want to put something in there that's too difficult to even pass, but also you've got to make sure that it's available for all users. So there's maybe an audio on there. There's probably some sort of visual areas there, and also potential for screen sort of keyboard users as well. So that's a lot of sort of like the mistakes and assumptions I've kind of gone through, and I've got a few final thoughts on this. So my recommendation is that to go and use the accessible checklist that's available there. So you can have a look at that from using that QR code, but basically that checklist is really, really sort of like up to date. It seems like one of the better standard ones to kind of follow. And it's definitely one that I would highly recommend if you're trying to look for accessible websites and build accessible websites. And also, like, I think, like, you know, it's better to kind of think of it as like there's almost like a, you know, multiple things that you need to do, really. So I feel like automated tools help. So Thomas is going to talk about that next. Manual testing is obviously going to help as well, because automated tools can probably do some things, but manual tools would need to be there in the sense of manual testing, would need to be there in the sense to see if something is color contrasted or something is focus and the focus state is different, and you can tell from that. And also just the tabbing order. Automated tools could probably get those done in, I guess, in the future, but I haven't seen too many that actually would tab through and check the tabbing order is correct and everything that you want to be tabbed on is actually tabbable. And then I feel like it's very important to get the whole team involved. So it's not just a case of, you know, one developer and that's it. It's got to be the whole sort of process from start to finish. And to talk about these automated tools, it's worth getting those into build processes. So when you deploy to different environments, that those things can be checked as well. And obviously, if there's anything that's failed, it will report back. And I think it's very important to make sure that it's not just like one type of accessible user. There's different types. So some people may be like really close to the screen. Some people may need to kind of zoom in. Some people may not be able to see anything. Some people may have no mouse access, etc. So there's lots of different types of users that we need to kind of think about. But if we can cover a majority of the things that are mentioned in the points that I've mentioned, and Graham, etc., and I hope the other presentations will as well in coming up, then it's very important to think about like an accessibility first approach. So I know like in sort of like a couple of years ago, we were like responsive first approach, but an accessibility first approach is very important as well. I feel like to get in there with the responsive. But now, if you think about it now, people don't even think about responsive first because it's a case of that's normality now. So it's very important to kind of think that if we can get accessibility in there and part of the normality, then there's nothing to worry about in the sense of accessibility. We've got that in there, no additional work. It's part of your best practices, and then it's done. So that's it from my side, and thank you very much. I don't know if there's any questions for me. If not, okay. If you've got any questions, just drop them in the chat or ask me later. But now we've got the remaining agenda. So we've got 2 more talks happening. So Tomas is going to talk about the Pail CI plugin to kind of prevent accessibility issues, and then we'll have Nadia after that. So over to you, Tomas.
Thank you. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so today I will talk about one of the many tools available out there in the market, to automate accessibility testing. And it's named Policy I. So let's start with introducing who I am. I'm Thomas, and I'm working at MMT Digital as a front-end engineer. So if you want to reach me out, you can scan the barcode, which will open my Twitter page. So I'll allow a couple seconds if anyone want to do that. Right, so okay, so what are we going to be covering today? So we will start with what is Policy I. Then we will move on to how to get started with Policy I, some examples afterwards, and what are the takeaways. So why would we want to use automated accessibility testing tools? So the first thing is that it accelerates detection of common issues and new features. So that means like common issues, so things like Graham and Ilesh talked in previously. So like hierarchy of headings, or like missing alt texts, and all these common things which might be missed quite easily. So then it does reduces regressions in existing features. So when those tools run, they automatically test. So for example, what was built previously, we didn't break anything, which is obviously a good thing to have. So avoids manual testing. It's not 100% true, but it does help to avoid like a lot of manual testing. There are things which still require manual testing, and we can't really avoid that, at least today. But hope in the future our tools will become more and more better. Then it also tests common accessibility issues, so it kind of falls back into the first point where I have already mentioned that. So catches accessibility problems. It catches like earlier on in our process. So for example, when we have automated tools set up in our pipelines. If accessibility tests fail, the build will stop and it will report an error, and that means we won't be able to release our code, which is not accessible, which is a great way to prevent basically inaccessible code going up to production environment. So what is Policy I? As guys themselves explain, so they are an open. It's not a company. They are just guys who provide multiple open source projects which help designers and developers to make websites more accessible, and which is great. So what is the aim? So it's basically when we set up our, for example, automated tools, our aim is to get those tools to run those tools and report any errors. For example, we have on pages. So it can be set to, so policy I, for example, it can be set to run on every single page on a website, or it can run only on URLs we want to. So, and it will report any alert, anything what is failing to us, so we can come back and fix those errors. So to get started with policy I, so I think as everyone knows, we will need a Node.js installed. So then we can use npm or yarn to install policy I itself, and just a single and then we just add a config file to so policy I knows where what to do. So and how do we want policy I to run? So so by default, so policy I will look at .pa11 yca config file in root of a website, but it's also possible to set it to a JavaScript file, or to have a custom root of our config file, and which can be also set into in the config where to look for that file. So so some useful config options we can use. So URLs, so it's already mentioned this. So we can provide an array of URLs to scan the website and report. So each URL can have its own option set. So that means so that if you use a sitemap option, we don't get that flexibility. So URLs is more flexible. We can set, for example, some viewports if you wanted to run on mobile and desktop and tablet, for example. So a sitemap is just a path to the sitemap. So so if you use a sitemap, we need to provide a URL where sitemap lives, and what policy I will do, it will load up that URL, look up the sitemap, and will scan all the URLs inside the block, basically path. And we can also combine URLs with sitemap as well, but on policy I website it says that sitemap will take priority, but I don't think that is true when I tested this. But so we also have like sitemap exclude. We can exclude some URLs we don't want to test. So maybe these URLs just documents we don't really want to test. So threshold option, which basically allows a number of errors warnings in the build. So if that exceeds, it will report failure. So I think that is a useful option for bigger projects. So for the project we recently worked at MMT, so we used policy I. We didn't need to use threshold because we don't get any errors warnings or notices as of today. So it's looking really nice. So so viewport. So I already touched on that and talked about URLs. So you can set a different viewport sizes to test against, which is useful. And so, for example, and when these are getting tested, we can screen capture them, and we can tell Pail CI to screen capture what's being tested and save these screenshots in the location locality. So just I think for screen capture, these all this folder structure need to be available. Pail CI won't create folders for us. So these are like I think the most at least the most used options I did come to. So let's move on to the next slide. So okay, so I'll jump onto demo. Just give me 1 second. So I've got this this template from HTML5.net website. It is not my website, so I'm not promoting. And I did use this theme just for demo purposes. So I did get in touch with this guy on Twitter and asked him if I can use for demo purposes. And so after I did the demo, I can send him back like corrected version with some of these accessibility issues fixed. So yeah, so this template it has 3 pages at the moment. A lot of elements. I did fix some of the accessibility. Some accessibility issues beforehand, but I left some in place so we can run through and correct them on this demo. So this is how my Pail CI config looks like. So I did set the standard to AAA. This is what we got on one of the clients we worked recently with, and so I'm using a combination of URLs. So I can, for example, I can set a different viewports. So this is just for a home page. So I've got a viewport for mobile and viewport for for a desktop, and our URLs they do live in my sitemap. So I didn't repeat index HTML, but I could do that. But that would scan our home page like 3 times because it runs first test on mobile, then the next test for desktop. And if we had anything in same URL in sitemap, it would run another test for a default viewport. I think the default viewport for Pail CI is 1024 pixels in width, and if I'm not mistaken, 600 pixels in height. So yes. Right. Let's run our tool. Just to get something appearing in our log. So you can see it loads URLs, tests them, and reports in console window. So we have like 4 URLs, and we have multiple errors reported. So with standard being AAA, that means it will report, for example, not only errors, it will report warnings as well. So if we use a standard and there is another option, for example, we can set a level of, so there are 3 available options for the level, like error, warning, or notice. So if we set the level on and we use AAA standard, it won't do anything. So it's like one of the gotchas. So right, let's jump in and fix those guys. So I'll work from the bottom up, which means I don't need to scroll basically all the way up and come back to see the error. So our last page scanned is elements HTML, and says email input element does not have name available to an accessibility API. So what it means, it means basically, but it doesn't have a label associated with input button. And it gives us which element it is. So we can grab this element, open up our elements HTML. Let's find this guide. Oh, it doesn't want to search for me. Thank you, WebStorm. But it is here. So what we need to do, so for example, because placeholder is already used, but it's not useful for screen readers. So we need a label. So let's put a label in, and if we don't want to break our layout design, for example, we can have a class of visual hidden and repeat the same value for the label, which is in placeholder. So that means our screen reader can come and still read out this name. So that's one thing. Oh, I think it was with regards to the email. Sorry, so I think we're just going to correct both problems in one go. So now, if we rerun our Pail tool, now we should have yes, errors less. Or not? Did I save this? So the email. Oh, sorry, my bad. So that's so yeah. So we can clearly see our tool works because I didn't provide a for attribute, and it does know which input we are associating this label with. So we had 5 errors on this page previously, and now we have 2 errors. So let's go back. Let's look up for the next. So the next one, it says this element has insufficient contrast level. So that also covers like contrast problems for us. So we can go back and, for example, find which element it is. So it will be under nav. So it gives us a path So, and let's say under main nav, so ID nav, then it says UL and child 1, which will be the first one, and child 2, so which is this one. So so we can't see what is the problem within HTML. So we probably need to go into in here and just looking in our inspect and look at CSS. So what do we have here in CSS? So we don't have a background color here, but we do have background color set under nav element itself. So it's because that's a that element has got a background color with alpha value, so it's with a based value. So we would need to set it to something what would work for us. So if you go into our file and find the nav element, so it has a background color of this. So just for demo purposes, because our color is white, I will just set the background color to black, so it does pass here. So, and if we rerun the tool, so that should get down to 0 errors. So okay, so we got one page fixed. Let's go. Sorry, that just crops into my view. So the next page is a generic page. So it has only one like an error. So it says that our heading hierarchy of our headings is not correct. So that means what we have on the page. So have we got H1? Yes, we do. So then we search for H2. No, we don't have H3. Oh, we have H1 and then H3s follow after that. So simple changes, just change both to H2, but we need to make sure that this change doesn't break our design guidelines. So probably we need to talk to our design team to make it look same like it was before. Same applies to the colors. We can just go in and make a change like I did. Like I changed this to background color to black. It's not up to developers to decide how it should look. So we probably need to feed that back to our design team, just so we can correct this and give it back to us. So I think we fixed this one, and now we are just moving back to our home page. So so first so one of the common problems, so it highlights that HTML doesn't have lang attributes. So lang attribute, if we set that, and that will be happy. So the next one, so image element is the only content of the link, but it is missing alt text. So so if we refresh this page, we look here, so we have an image which sort of it is potentially like a used just for how to say stuck. it doesn't provide any context, so it could potentially just have a role presentation on it. So because it's not like a product image which can have a meaningful alt text. So if you give this role presentation to the image, so that that will get rid of the warning, but we shouldn't do that for the images where the alt text should be meaningful. So for example, if you scroll down here, these look like article images. So we probably should have a proper alt text. So if I just go in and say, let's go down purposes. So article 1. This one. 2 for this one. So now, if we are our palette tool, which gives 0 errors for our mobile, 1 error for desktop view, and so same error. So it's saying our main footer, div, and span has insufficient contrast ratio for the color contrast. So we can just grab this and will be footer. So this element, so span class extra. So it has a color of white. So if we can basically remove this color, or we can set to what has been suggested. So if we go back to our CSS file and find a pagination. So set it to this color and around the tool. So now we should have everything, all our pages passing. So we are in a happy position. I think I took longer than expected, so I'll try to be quick with next slides. Just get those through. So policy runners. So this out of the box we have 2 available runners. So HTML CS, which is default test runner, and if you want your standard to be AAA, this is the runner which will be used. So Axe is another test runner which is available out of the box, but you cannot use AAA standard with Axe. So that's downside. Or you can have a custom runner which you can build yourself. You can use any other runner you find on the wide net. The choice basically is wide. So obviously you will need to follow policy config and setup to get it running. But yeah, that's it in this. So policy is have actions coming in probably soon. It seems like an interesting feature which worth keeping an eye on. So it basically allows us to fire events on elements, wait for elements to be loaded on a page, fill the form fields, click buttons, and for example, wait for something to be completed. And yeah, I think Ilesh already covered that in our previous MMT Tech Meet-up, where we talked about end-to-end testing. So that seems like policy is moving to that end as well. So gotchas. So don't have too many of them. So sitemap path can be defined in JSON config. Probably it would be nice just to show, but you cannot define a sitemap URL in the config. It has to be provided in like command line. And the other thing is the HTML CSS runner doesn't deal properly with RGBA colors, so the beta version of Pilot fixes that, but it's still not in stable release. So if you're going to use it, yeah, keep that in mind. And yeah, the takeaways. So some of those I already mentioned. So it basically accelerates our detection of common issues. We have seen in demo, so we can like having hierarchy alt text and colors and all of these common things. So it saves. So it also saves our time. So we don't need to spend a lot of time, for example, manually testing. So it covers these common issues we can overlook as developers. And yeah, it detects problems early on, so the problems don't go end up and, for example, development environment, because the build will fail and it will be reported straight up. And yeah, it is easy, it's fast, and it doesn't cost anything. So you just need to set up and let it run. And yeah, that is it from me. So if you got any questions, let me know.
So do you have any questions for Tomas? If not, then again, just use the chat and he'll be able to answer those as well. Next up, we've got Nadia. So I can pass over to you.
Cool. So my name is Nadia. I'm a front-end developer and accessibility lead at Reason One, and you can find me on Twitter. That's my face. Also, this is my face. So, you know, I will be talking a little bit about accessibility and using user persona profiles to develop accessible websites. I know Ilesh and Graham have already covered a little bit about what accessibility is, but you know, for that one person who still might not be convinced about the importance of developing accessible websites, I'm just going to go over it quickly again. So web accessibility, it's the practice of making your website usable by as many people as possible and giving them equal access to information and functionality. So if you think about disabilities as a mismatch between a person's abilities and their environment, then equal access is about making sure that you're correcting that mismatch. A disability, it's not a limitation, but it's a relative condition that people might have. So they might be experiencing it in just that moment of time, and it means it's a problem that we can easily solve for them. So it is our responsibility as developers, as designers, as product managers, testers, to make sure that we are creating products that are usable by as many people as possible. So just quickly looking at the numbers again, you might think that people with disabilities are a very small population and your users might not need assistive technologies when they're accessing your product. but that's not true. So globally, it's about 15% of the population that has some challenges in dealing with basic daily tasks. In the UK, it's more than 11 million people who have reported living with some form of a disability. And in Canada, that number is 1 in 5 person with at least one disability. So these disabilities cover a big range of the types of disabilities, but then also the degree in which people might experience them. You might have people who have permanent disabilities, so there's visual disabilities such as low or no vision or color blindness. You might have auditory disabilities, which include hearing loss, motor disabilities. So that's going to impact people's ability to use a mouse or a trackpad, and then cognitive disabilities, which include things like ADHD and dyslexia. Some of these disabilities can be permanent, or they could be temporary or situational. So you might have a concussion, you might have a fractured arm, or an ear infection that might impact your auditory abilities at the moment. It might also be situational. So think about the times that you've had to use your phone when there's bright sunlight, or if you're doing something and you're also trying to look up something on your Google Maps, maybe with your phone at the same time. So those are all situational things that temporarily impact our abilities. So in order to understand, well, in order to make sure that the websites and the products that we're building are accessible and they people with different abilities are able to use them, we need to understand how these people navigate the web. They use assistive technologies such as screen readers, eye tracking software, color overlays if they have color visual disabilities around color blindness, or they might even use keyboard shortcuts to navigate the web. So one of the ways in which we think about the people that we're building things for generally is through user personas. Typically, this is something your design and UX team might build out based on research, and you might be referencing it in your work throughout the project lifecycle. But if you're not familiar with user personas, they are fictional profiles based on user research, and they represent different types of users who might come to your website. They don't represent one single person, but they're sort of composed of different types of users, and it's based on real research. It helps you understand what your users need, what they experience, their behaviors and goals, and then it guides design and development process to make sure that we have a good user experience. User persona profiles, they help you answer questions like, well, how would Michael or Danielle or Sarah experience feature X? And what is this user's underlying need that we're trying to solve through our brand, our website, or our new feature that we're trying to develop? And when we're thinking about our the general population who's going to be our users of the website, it makes sense, obviously, to consider people who have disabilities as well and who might be relying on different assistive technologies. So how might you use a persona? As you're taking these beautiful static designs that your designers have developed and converting them into interactive websites, you're going to make sure that you're building it according to the people's needs. So if your user persona has a specific disability around, if they have a motor disability, then you're going to make sure that your feature is keyboard accessible. And then you will use that profile to reference through your testing as well. So as a developer, when you're unit testing your work, you'll be referencing that profile, but then when it goes into the QA cycle, and even in UAT, you will still be referencing those profiles to make sure that you're testing with the appropriate technology. So with keyboard, screen reader, zoom text, which is screen magnification, and you're also running it through contrast checkers. And finally, these persona profiles also help to prioritize newer features that you might be building or any bugs that you have to fix based on the needs of the people that you've identified. One thing about creating user persona is that it is through doing actual research and synthesizing that. You're building these profiles based on your target audience, you're serving your actual users and getting real data. And then finally, you're validating your assumptions through user testing. So building these profiles and, writing code according to these people's needs is one thing, but you need to absolutely verify it with actual people. And you might do that either in your early stages when you're prototyping something, you might include people there, or even a better way of doing it is at the end, making sure that you're including users of different abilities in user testing through your QA cycle. So one important thing to note is everything that's going to follow, it's an example of the users you might have. And in reality, people might have a combination of different disabilities and in varying degrees. And then building and testing with these does not replace the need for testing with real people. All right, so the first example I have is of Lee, who is an online shopper with color blindness, and they have partial vision. So let's take a look a little bit about what they have. So they have red and green color blindness, which is one of the most common ones among men. They encounter problems shopping online when websites and apps don't have sufficient color contrast. He has a problem reading text when the color contrast is not sufficient enough, and it's hard to fill forms when only color is being used to determine required fields. It's also hard for them to make choices when they're just seeing color swatches rather than labeled colors for product options. They're also partially sighted, so they're using a screen magnification software to increase the size of the text and graphics on the page. Which means they sometimes have to scroll vertically and horizontally to get all the information they need if the content hasn't been developed with accessibility in mind. And then finally, he has trouble interacting with functionality that gets cut off when your content is zoomed in. So there might be like a modal, and if you're zoomed in and it doesn't responsibly fit into your screen, it's hard to kind of figure out where a button is to click out of the modal, or go to a next step if it's a multi-step thing. Some of the things that we can do to make these life a lot more easier is make sure that you're using at least 3:1 contrast ratio for content and your UI components. So any form fields, anytime you're using just like the magnifying glass to signify a search button, or a little, the eye icon for info, anything like that, you need to make sure that it has proper contrast. Color cannot be the only means for communicating information as well. So if you're just saying a field is required by just, giving it a different color, that's not enough. Or if a field has an error, just giving it this red outline, it's useful for only somebody who can visually see it. But people with color disabilities might not be able to get that information. So you need to make sure that you have something in text as an inline error that's connected to the field. And it's not just for color, it's also for somebody who might be using a screen reader. They're not going to know that a field, there is an error on the page and what that error is, unless there is text there to indicate. Also, color cannot be the only way to identify links. So sometimes you'll see beautiful designs and the link is just like a slightly different color to the text, and that's how they're identifying it. But if you put all of that in a grayscale, you'll lose context of where some interactive component might be. And then again, text should be able to be resized up to 200% without losing any content our functionality. And these numbers, the 3-to-1 ratio and 200%, that is coming from WCAG criteria. So I'm referencing WCAG 2.1. So when you are zoomed into a text, you shouldn't need to scroll into dimensions, and your content should just flow in a single column. So a person just needs to scroll vertically to be able to get all the information that they need. Any field labels, instructions, and errors should be directly above or below the field. So for example, if this error, instead of being under the field, was next to it and somebody had zoomed in, they might not know that there's a bit of text right next to the field unless they were to scroll horizontally as well. So it's always easier for them to be able to see the information as they're scrolling vertically. The next persona I have is Alex, who is a reporter with repetitive stress injury. That injury makes it painful for them to use the mouse or type for extended periods of time when they're doing their research and when they're writing. They use an ergonomic keyboard and also rely on keyboard shortcuts to navigate websites. They use voice recognition software on their computer and mobile, and they have trouble using websites where content and functionality cannot be used by keyboard alone. So if you're building a custom component and it's only accessible with a mouse, then Alex cannot use it. And sometimes it's hard for them to skip to content and navigate sections on a page without using many keyboard commands, which can be very tiring, and it limits the time that they can actually be productive in their work. So here are a few things that we can do to make Alex's life a little bit easier and better. Always provide visible focus states like we talked about a little while ago. And you need to make sure that your focus states also have sufficient contrast. So, and include skip links. Skip links are basically links that you can provide at the beginning of repeated content that is going to show up across different templates. So if you have a rather large menu at the top of your page or a sidebar that is always repeated across different templates, you might provide a little visually hidden skip link that a person who's using a keyboard, that will be the first thing that they tab to, and it will allow them to jump straight to the main body of the content rather than having to sit through, I don't know, 10, 12, 15, however many items you might have in your menu. And especially if they're going through different pages on your site, they don't necessarily need to go through all those links unless there is a significant change in that menu that they absolutely must be informed about. Also use semantic HTML, and any custom component should be keyboard accessible. So when you use things like main tag, a header tag, a footer, a side, things like that, people who are using keyboard and screen reader, especially with screen reader, they can easily jump directly to those sections. And if you're using semantic HTML elements, for example, if you're building a button and you're using a div or a span for that button, you're going to have to remember to build in all the things that are necessary for that button to be accessible through a keyboard and a screen reader. Whereas if you were to use a button element on its own, out of the box, it gives you a lot of accessibility goodness right away. You don't have to put in things like states and roles and keyboard interactions on it. So that makes your job easier as well if you're just, sticking to the things that things like buttons and lists and things that need to be marked up semantically. Your content should also follow a logical DOM order visually as well. So if I'm seeing on the page that you have the main body on your left side of the page, and then you have an aside or like a sidebar on the right, but my tab order is all messed up, that is going to be a little bit confusing and frustrating because I'm expecting to go from top to bottom and then left to right on the page, whereas just shifting things around visually with CSS and not making sure that you are also shifting around the tab order, which you actually shouldn't be messing with too much anyway, that's just going to be a really poor user experience for people. Finally, making sure that you're managing focus for people. So if there is a modal, your keyboard focus should move to the modal when it opens and then back onto the toggle button or the trigger button when you close that. And while the modal is open, your keyboard focus should remain within that modal and not go to the content that's behind. Any other interactive components like buttons and links should be large enough. So somebody who might have motor issues, they can easily click them on smaller devices and they don't have to try too hard to like click, there's so many times that I just like hit the wrong button on when I'm looking at things on my phone without even meaning to, just because the button might be too small or the tap area might be too small. And your designer might push back sometimes to say, well, I want it to look a certain size because it's pretty this way, which is fine. But as long as you're building a tap area around it, that's sufficient enough for somebody to easily interact with it. It doesn't matter what it actually looks like. So you might have like a really teeny tiny Instagram logo in the footer, but you can still make it easily accessible by building out a significantly larger tab area. Any visual labels on the page should also match the accessible name of the element. So I've seen sometimes people will have a link and the title of the link is with the title attribute. They might change it to something else, which does not match the actual text that is contained within the link. So it might say read more within the link, but then the title attribute says something else. So somebody who might be using a screen reader, that would be confusing for them because, or somebody who's using speech to text or using speech to interact with the page, if they're saying click the read more button, but the accessible name of that element is something else, that they're not going to be able to actually tell their software to click that button. So anytime it says sign up for a thing, for example, your accessible name should also match the same label. Okay, and then final profile that I have here is for Mila, who is a senior staff member who's blind. Mila works at a bank. She relies on screen reader on her computer to navigate navigate websites, complete and submit forms, and access information in an effective manner. She will leave any website when the screen reader cannot read the structural information on the page, such as headings, columns, rows, link lists, any form controls. And it's frustrating for her to have to tab through a lot of that content to get to the most useful information. All right, so what do we do for Mila? We make sure to include text alternatives for any non-text content. So anytime you have images, graphs, you have video or audio, you're going to make sure that you include text alternatives. So for videos, you'll have transcripts. For any graphs, you might give an equivalent table or like have that information explained in a different way on the page, as long as they have that information somewhere right next to the image as well. Any content that is on the page should appear and behave in predictable ways. So your navigation doesn't just randomly switch place as you go through the website and it's always in the same place. Your tab order again should go from top to bottom and it's not just jumping around in the page. You need to also have a logical heading structure, and this is important because when people are navigating your website through a screen reader, they're able to jump to different elements of the page for navigation, and headings is one of the biggest ways people navigate. when they're using a screen reader. So they can pull up a whole list of all just the headings and then skip to the next one and the next one. And the same with links and buttons and tables. So using semantic elements for those is also very important to provide that information to people. So they have context of what they're actually interacting with. And then programmatically associating labels and errors to form fields. So I have a little example here. This is the only code little snippet that I have. So here I'm using aria described by to connect the error to the field. So somebody, when they land on the field or click into it, they are able to hear that error. So we're connecting it with the ID of the error here. Then there is aria required here to programmatically tell them that this is a required field. And I'm also connecting the label here with the for attribute and giving it the ID of the input. And this is one of the super simple basic things that you can do. And it's also one of the things that I've seen broken in most forms when I'm doing audits across different sites. And finally, one of the things that we tend to forget about when, especially in modern web development, is when you're using JavaScript to dynamically update information on your page, somebody who can visually see that page will be able to see that something happened. A listing updated because you clicked a bunch of filters, or you submitted a form and then there was like a success message on the page. And all of this information happened without the page reloading. So visually you can see that, but people who might be relying on screen readers who can't actually see this will have no way of finding out unless you provide that information to them. You can do that using aria live regions. And aria live takes a couple of different values. The most useful one is probably aria live polite. What it does is it waits for the screen reader to finish performing the task that it is doing right now, and then give your user the update about the new content that just appeared on the page. You can use aria live assertive only when it's the kind of information that they need to have right away. So it's super important. You need to interrupt the user in the middle of what they're already doing and tell them this thing happened and it needs their urgent attention. So those were some of the things that I wanted to go over. They're basically accessibility principles that you should be thinking about. These are not the only things you would think about for somebody who's using a screen reader or a keyboard or a color overlay or anything like that. But these are just, you know, a few helpful things that you might want to think about. I do have a link to, or links to some resources. The persona profiles that I used were sort of composed from examples from W3C, which is right here, and then also gov.uk's persona profiles. I can tweet this link out later or give Ilesh the slides and he can send it out to people if you're interested in any of these links. There are a couple of tools in here as well that you can take a look at for contrast checking, for running automated tests on your pages, or No Coffee, the Chrome extension that's pretty useful to stimulate a few different visual disabilities to kind of experience how a person with that disability might be looking at seeing your content. Yeah, so that's all I have. I don't know if anybody has questions.
Are there any questions for Nadia? Nope. Okay, so that's really great, Nadia. Thank you for presenting. And what we might do is, if we can upload those slides somewhere, then we can just send the links around when I publish the video. So that would be great. We'll do that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, brilliant. So I guess thank you everyone for staying for this meetup. It is the last one for the year, so I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you can see the videos once they've been sort of uploaded, and I'll tweet and share them out then hopefully you can get them, and then hopefully join us for the next meetup in Jan time next year. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.